first time I saw their house, it felt like even the trees were holding their breath. It stood at the end of a narrow gravel path that split off from the main road like a secret being whispered too loudly. The pines surrounding it were tall and still, unnaturally still, like they'd grown weary of movement in that one spot. There were no birdsong, no rustling leaves, no hum of insects. Just an unnatural quiet that pressed into my ears until it felt like the silence itself might scream. I hadn't meant to find the house. I'd only been in Holbrook for 3 weeks, still unpacking boxes and pretending I'd made a brave decision by moving here. It was supposed to be a clean break, smaller town, slower pace, less noise inside and out. I had quit my job in the city after everything with my brother went sideways, sold the car, rented the cheapest place I could find, and figured I'd give peace a chance. On that first drive, I was just trying to clear my head. I didn't know the winding roads yet. My GPS gave up miles ago, and I ended up deeper in the woods than I realized. And that's when I saw it. The house wasn't old in the charming sense. It was worn in a way that didn't feel lived in but watched. Its white paint had grayed with age and mildew. Shutters hung crooked, not like they were broken, but like they had been opened to peer at something long ago and never quite closed. Behind the fogged windows, I could have sworn I saw movement, slow, deliberate movement, like a curtain gently falling back into place just a moment too late. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't even slow down, not really. Just enough to see the totems. They hung from the trees, strange figures made from twigs and bits of bone, some wrapped in what looked like red thread, others tied with thin ropes. One spun slightly in the breeze, its crude limbs clicking together. Further along the ditch by the gravel, something was laid out in a pattern, small animal bones arranged in a spiral, delicate as lace, but deeply wrong in its intention. Later, I learned that house belonged to the Henley family. Everyone in Holbrook knew them. Or rather, everyone spoke of them. They lived alone, miles out on land no one else wanted. Rumors stretched back decades. Some said they never went into town except for the old man, Russell Henley, who would show up at the co-op once a season and buy sacks of salt, kerosene, and jars of honey. No one remembered seeing his wife in years. Others whispered that they kept to the old ways, that they spoke to things in the woods, that they summoned spirits not meant for this world. Every kid in town grew up daring each other to find the house. Most never did. Those who did stopped talking about it. And a few left town altogether. I didn't say anything about it at first. I figured it was just local folklore. Every small town has its monster story. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way that house made me feel, like it had noticed me. Like it remembered me. A few days later, I asked the woman at the gas station about the totems. I phrased it casually, like I'd seen something in the woods near my rental and thought it was maybe an art project or part of a local festival. She went still, her hands hovering over the change drawer. "You stay away from that place," she said quietly, not making eye contact. "Ain't nothing, they're worth seeing." I asked her what she meant, and she just shut the register a little too fast and walked away. That was the first time I had the dream. I was standing in the woods at night, facing the Henley house, except the trees behind me were too close, leaning in as though the forest itself didn't want to look at it either. I saw the totem swinging. I heard something, a low wheeze, rising into a sound like chanting, but slurred and inhuman. Lights flickered behind the windows, and a figure walked slowly across the upstairs landing, dragging something behind them. A limp shadow. I woke up with my heart racing and a strange taste in my mouth, like dirt and copper. I told myself it was just stress. A trick of my mind, feeding on a creepy house and a half-remembered story. But that morning, when I took my trash out, I found something hanging from the tree beside my driveway. A totem. Twigs. Thread. Bones. And it was still swinging, even though the wind had stopped hours ago. I didn't touch the totem. I couldn't. It hung just above eye level, swaying ever so slightly, its tiny limbs bound tight with frayed twine. I stood there too long, staring at it, half expecting it to twitch or fall or speak. Eventually, I backed away and went inside, locking the door behind me even though I knew a deadbolt wouldn't mean much against something that could tie bones into knots without leaving a footprint. That whole day, I tried to act normal. Made coffee. Opened my laptop. Answered a few emails, wrote half a paragraph of a freelance article I was supposed to turn in days ago. But the words wouldn't come. My mind kept circling back to that thing in the tree. And how it got there. I hadn't told anyone what I saw out there. I hadn't posted about it. The only explanation was that someone had followed me. Maybe even from the house. That night, I drove back to town. I needed to feel surrounded by life again, even if it was just a few farmers and dusty gas station lights. I ended up at the Hallbrook Diner, half deserted except for an older couple in the corner and a man hunched over a cup of coffee at the counter. He looked up when I came in, mid-50s, maybe, with that weathered look people get when they've spent more years outside than in. He nodded like he'd been expecting me. "You're the new guy up on Briar Road," he said. Not a question, just a quiet confirmation. I nodded back and ordered a coffee I didn't really want. We sat in silence for a while. Then, without looking at me, he said, "You saw the house?" I didn't answer right away. I just waited. "You'll start hearing things soon. In the trees. They sound like breathing at first. Then they get worse." I asked him what he meant, trying to keep my voice even. He didn't answer that part. Instead, he said, "They don't like being looked at. Don't want to be known. Every time someone gets curious, they get closer." I asked who they were. He looked at me for the first time then. His eyes were pale blue and something behind them had already given up. "The Henleys," he said. "And whatever they brought with them." I wanted to ask more, but a moment later, he slid a 10 under his mug and walked out into the dark. The next few nights were worse. The dreams came more often. Each time, I was closer to the house. First at the tree line, then at the porch, then at the upstairs landing where the shadow had moved. The sounds became clearer too, wheezing, high-pitched humming, and something like rope being pulled taut. 3 days after I found the totem, I woke up to find the word "look" scratched into the condensation on my kitchen window. From the inside, I checked the locks, the windows. Everything was untouched. No signs of forced entry. No footprints outside in the dew. That same morning, I drove into town again, determined to get some answers. I went to the local library, which was really just a back room in the old municipal building. The woman at the front desk was polite but hesitant when I asked about the Henleys. "You won't find much," she said. "They've lived here forever, but they've always been apart." I pressed her. Eventually, she pointed me toward the archives, dusty shelves lined with old newspapers and town records. I spent hours digging through brittle pages, scanning headlines about storms and harvests and county fairs. Then I found something. A clipping from 1996. Local teen missing after visiting forest property. The article didn't name the Henleys directly, but the location matched. Another from 2003, pastor resigns amid claims of witchcraft in Hallbrook. Again, no names. Just vague references to a certain family and disturbing objects found in the woods. Most chilling was the article from 1982, 3 townsfolk institutionalized following group hallucination. It described a group of locals who went to the Henley property to confront strange goings-on. Days later, they were found in the church basement, muttering gibberish and carving symbols into the stone floor with broken fingernails. The official explanation? Mass hysteria. But the librarian wouldn't meet my eyes when I brought it up. She just shook her head and told me, "Let sleeping things lie." That night, I woke up at exactly 3:11 a.m. Not because of a sound, but because of the silence. And from the edge of the trees beyond my backyard, I saw something watching me. Not a person. Not quite. Its shape flickered just at the corner of my vision like heat rising off asphalt. But when I looked straight at it, it vanished. And then the singing started. High, warbling, and human. Coming from the direction of the Henley house. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the sound rising out of the trees, soft and distant at first, but unmistakably unnatural. It wasn't words exactly, but it had rhythm. It had intent. It was a song without a language. A lullaby meant for something older than people. And it wasn't coming from one voice. It was coming from many. By the time the sun broke through the trees, the sound had faded completely, like it had never been there at all. Birds returned. The breeze picked up. But the air still felt wrong, hollow in a way that settled into my chest like a second heartbeat. I spent the morning on edge, pacing from window to window, half convinced I'd find more totems or bones arranged on my porch. But everything was still. Too still. Even the squirrels were gone. I tried telling myself I was overreacting, that it was just isolation messing with my head. But I couldn't stop looking toward the woods. Toward their house. Something had shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was pulling me. Like the more I tried to look away, the more I could feel it watching. Waiting. It sounds insane, but I swear the forest had subtly rearranged itself since the first time I saw that place, like the path back to the Henleys' land was no longer a choice, but a direction carved into the bones of the landscape. That afternoon I drove into town again. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see people. To hear noise. Reality. I ended up at a second-hand shop near the edge of Holbrook that I hadn't noticed before, probably because it was half covered in ivy and looked like it should have been condemned a decade ago. The place smelled like cedar and dust. The man inside was wiry and soft-spoken, with a strange kind of tiredness in his eyes, like he'd been waiting for something for a long time and didn't expect it to come. "You've been out near the Henleys," he said the moment I stepped through the door. Not a question. I froze. "How do you know that?" He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You start carrying it. The weight. The pull. People who get too close always do." I asked him what that meant, the pull. He just gestured toward the back of the shop, where a wall was covered in newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and strange charcoal sketches. Most were blurred or water-damaged, but I recognized the shape in the center of several drawings. The house. One sketch showed it from above, surrounded by trees that curved inward like arms. Another showed totems hanging from the trees with lines drawn between them, some kind of map, maybe. A few were just faces. Hollow, slack-jawed, with wide, empty eyes. "They've been here a long time," he said. "Longer than the town. Some say longer than the forest. They don't die. They change." I asked him who they were. He looked at me and his voice dropped lower. "The Henleys were human once. But something answered them out there. And when you start looking too long, it starts looking back." I told him about the totems. The dream. The singing. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he pulled a dusty manila folder from under the counter and handed it to me. Inside were photos. Real, aged photographs. People standing near the Henley house, some from the 60s, some as recent as a few years ago. In each one, the person had a strange expression, blank but alert, like someone trying to remember a dream they never had. One woman was staring straight into the camera. Her eyes were clouded over like glass. In the margin, someone had written, "Last seen 3 weeks later." No record of departure. Still on tax roll. I asked him if any of them came back. He hesitated. "They come back, different." When I asked what he meant, he just said, "You'll know. If you see them, you'll feel it." I left the shop with that folder in my bag and a growing pressure behind my eyes, like my thoughts were being rearranged while I wasn't looking. That night, I didn't sleep. I left every light on and sat with my back against the wall, staring at the woods. At exactly 3:11 a.m., the singing started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from under the house. Low. Muffled. Like someone whispering into the floorboards. And just before it stopped, I swear I heard my name. By the next morning, I'd reached a point where I couldn't tell if I was terrified or just numb. There's a moment, somewhere past fear, where your body stops reacting because it knows it can't do anything. Like it's accepted something bigger than it understands. That's where I was. I didn't call anyone. Who would I call? What would I say? "Hey, something's singing under my house at 3 in the morning, and I think the forest is watching me?" No one was going to believe that. Hell, I barely believed it myself, but that didn't stop it from being true. That day, I tried to stay busy, vacuumed the same rug twice, rearranged the kitchen cabinets, walked in circles through the backyard. I kept catching myself staring at the edge of the woods. That line of trees felt like a wall now, like the other side didn't obey the same rules. And around noon, I noticed something new. Just past the tree line, hanging from a low pine branch, was another totem. Different this time. Bigger. And directly beneath it, laid out in the dried pine needles, was a pattern made of bones spiraled outward from a central knot of feathers and what looked like braided hair. I knew in my gut that it hadn't been there the day before. I walked toward it even though every part of me screamed not to. The air felt heavier as I moved, like walking underwater. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I stopped. The totem was gently swinging again, though there wasn't even a breeze. Then I saw the footprints. Not shoe prints, bare feet. Small, narrow, and deep enough to suggest someone had been standing there a long time. They led from the woods straight to the totem, circled it once, and stopped a few feet from where I was standing. No return prints. As I stared down at them, something shifted in my peripheral vision. Fast and low, like a person crouched and running just behind the trees. I spun to look, but there was nothing there. Only silence. Again. That night, I stayed awake on purpose. Not out of fear. This time, it was intentional. I wanted to know. I needed to know. Around 2:45 a.m., I turned off the lights, sat by the window, and waited. At 3:11, like clockwork, the singing began. Except this time, it wasn't just from under the house. It was outside too, from the woods, from multiple directions. It was the same strange cadence, a high, warbled melody with no real tune, like children humming underwater. And then, footsteps, not stomping or creeping, just a soft, even rhythm of feet moving slowly around the perimeter of my house. Once, twice, then a pause, then silence. I held my breath. That's when I heard the voice, not in the air, not in my ears, but in my head. "You're close now." The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like it had cut into my thoughts directly. I recoiled, knocking over the lamp next to me, and suddenly the night returned to normal. No sound, no song, just me, alone, heart pounding. The next day I left the house. Not permanently, I just couldn't be inside anymore. I drove around for hours, circling the back roads, trying to convince myself I hadn't completely lost touch with reality. Eventually, I stopped near an old church on the west edge of Holbrook. The cemetery there was small, overgrown, and mostly abandoned. I wasn't sure why I went there. I just did. That's when I saw her. An old woman sitting alone on a bench between two headstones, dressed in all black, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting. I don't know why, but I sat beside her. We didn't speak for a while. Eventually, she said, "You've seen it." I didn't ask how she knew. I just nodded. "They reach into you," she said, "little by little. You think you're watching them, but they're inside your thoughts before you even realize it." I asked her if she meant the Henleys. Her mouth twisted into something like a frown, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "They gave up being people a long time ago. Gave it up willingly. There's something in those woods, and it listens when you speak its name. They were the first to ask, and it answered." I asked what it was. She looked at me like she pitied me. "It's not what, it's where. The house, it isn't just a place. It's a door, and the farther in you go, the less you come back out." Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, square photograph. She handed it to me. It was a picture of the Henley house, faded and sun-worn. Except this time, there were faces in the windows. All identical, pale, staring, mouths slightly open, as if humming. As I looked up to ask her where it came from, I froze. She was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just an empty bench and the photo still in my hand. I should have driven home, locked my doors, burned that picture, but I didn't, because something in me had already decided. I had to go back to that house. I don't remember deciding to drive there, not in a conscious way. It was like my body moved before my thoughts caught up. One moment I was turning the photograph over in my hands, and the next, I was pulling onto that narrow gravel path again, the one that splintered off the main road like a cracked bone pointing deep into the woods. The trees grew denser as I drove, the canopy overhead stitching the sky into slivers. The sunlight dimmed unnaturally fast, like I'd crossed into a different time of day without the hours passing. And then I saw it again, the Henley house, exactly as I remembered it, only wronger somehow, leaning in on itself. Windows darker than they should be, like the glass wasn't just tinted, but opaque. The paint was the same sickly gray, and the roof sagged under its own age. But the strangest thing was the air. It had that stillness again, that pressure, like I was underwater and couldn't tell how deep I'd gone. I parked the car at the edge of the clearing. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. Every logical part of me was screaming to reverse, to get out, to forget this entire stretch of forest existed. But then something moved in the upstairs window. A figure, pale, still, its face obscured behind glass that shouldn't reflect light in a forest this dim. I blinked, and it was gone. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like ash and damp wood. I could hear my own breath louder than the wind, louder than the creak of branches. My feet crunched softly on pine needles as I approached the porch. Each step felt heavy, not physically but mentally, like I was dragging a piece of myself behind me that didn't want to come. The porch boards groaned under my weight, slow, protesting creaks that seemed louder than they should have been. The door was closed but not locked. I reached for the knob, expecting resistance, but it turned smoothly, effortlessly. Inside, the house was dark but not pitch black. There was an ambient glow like candlelight reflected from a room just out of sight. The air was colder than it had any right to be. The interior was sparse. Dust-covered furniture, faded rugs, yellowed photographs nailed to the walls with rusted pins. None of the pictures showed faces clearly, they were all blurred at the edges, like the camera lens had been afraid to focus. And that sound, that low, wheezing hum, was back. It wasn't coming from the walls or floor. It was in my head, vibrating behind my eyes, threading through my thoughts like a splinter under the skin. I moved down the hallway toward the staircase. The moment I stepped on the first stair, the hum grew louder. Not in volume, but in presence. Like I wasn't just hearing it anymore, I was under it. Like a blanket had dropped over the world. Halfway up the stairs, I passed a cracked picture frame hanging crooked on the wall. It showed the family, the Henleys. A man. A woman. 3 children. But again, their faces were just gone. Not scratched out or blurred, but absent. As though the photo had never held them at all. At the top of the stairs, I turned left toward the room I'd seen the figure in. The door was half open, its surface carved with strange symbols, loops and slashes and eye-like shapes, all interwoven. As I pushed it open, the room inside was empty. But the window was wide open, and hanging from the curtain rod was a totem, much larger than the ones I'd seen before. This one had tiny hands, mummified, desiccated fingers wrapped in twine, dangling from its base. Beneath it, a pile of bones, arranged in a perfect spiral. My legs refused to move. Behind me, the floorboards creaked. Not once. Twice. Like someone had just stepped into the hallway. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I stared at the totem. And I realized something horrible. The spiral on the floor, the bones, it wasn't just a random shape. It matched something I'd seen before. In the folder from the antique shop. In the journal clippings. In dreams I hadn't remembered until that very moment. It was a map. And I was standing at its center. And then a voice, sharp and inside my skull, spoke again. Now you see. Now you understand. My body turned before I could stop it. There was nothing in the hallway. No person. No shadow. Only a mirror. One that hadn't been there before. In it I saw myself. But I wasn't alone. Behind me stood 5 figures, tall, unmoving, their faces identical to mine, but hollowed out like masks. They stared forward. Not at my reflection. But through it. Not watching me. Watching out. As if I were the reflection now. As if I had become the glass. I stumbled back from the mirror so hard I hit the far wall. My shoulder cracked against the wood, but I didn't feel it, not really. My whole body was numb, like I'd been dipped in ice. I kept staring at the glass, half hoping the figures would be gone. They weren't. They stood there, still as ever, with my face stretched over theirs like a mask that didn't quite fit. Their mouths were parted just slightly. Not enough to speak, but enough to sing. And though no sound came from the mirror, I could feel it again, rising behind my eyes, wrapping around the soft parts of my brain like cold fingers curling inward. The humming. But it was deeper now. Fuller. Like whatever it was had rooted itself in me. I ran. Down the stairs, past the hallway photos that seemed to twitch at the edges of my vision. The front door was still open, but the world outside didn't look the same anymore. The light was wrong. Too flat. Too silent. Like I was running toward a painting of a forest instead of the real thing. I didn't care. I bolted outside, down the porch steps, straight to my car. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the house had changed or if something was following me. The car started on the first try. I drove so fast down the gravel road I barely noticed the branches whipping past the windows like the trees were leaning in, trying to stop me from leaving. It wasn't until I hit the paved road that I realized I couldn't remember the last 10 minutes of the drive. There was nothing. A gap in my memory where thought should have been. I didn't know if that meant I'd lost time or if something had taken it. Back home, I locked everything. Every door. Every window. Pulled the blinds. Turned on every light in the house. I stood in the living room for hours, waiting for the singing, the totems, the feeling of being watched. but nothing came. Not that night, not the next. For a brief moment I convinced myself it was over, that I had gone too far, and something had scared me just enough to stop. That maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined the worst parts. But I didn't believe that, because something inside me had changed. I could feel it, like an extra layer of perception had been grafted over my thoughts, humming constantly just beneath the surface. I'd walk into rooms and forget why I was there. I'd wake up standing at the window with no memory of getting out of bed. And the dreams, God, the dreams, they were different now. Not just images of the Henley house, but of reflections. I'd dream of mirrors showing me rooms I'd never been in, faces I didn't recognize, people looking through me, and sometimes I wasn't even in them. Just my voice, humming in the background like a lullaby sung through broken teeth. A week later, the first twist came. I was in the hardware store grabbing batteries and duct tape, anything to make the house feel more fortified. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the night I came back from the house. As I checked out, the man behind the counter squinted at me and said, "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." I told him I didn't follow. He frowned. "You were in here 2 days ago. Same coat, same boots. Asked about deer traps and twine. Didn't say much. I hadn't been. I know I hadn't." I pressed him for details and he just shrugged. "You looked tired, a little pale. Thought maybe you were just hunting. But your eyes were weird. Didn't blink much." I didn't know what to say, so I left. I went home and tore through the house. Checked every camera on my phone, my car mileage, anything that could prove where I'd been. Everything was as it should have been, except the mirror in my bedroom had a new crack. Thin, spider-webbed across the corner, like something had looked out a little too hard. And that night, I saw something new in the dream. Not the Henley house, not the forest. It was a basement, damp, stone-walled, lit by a single hanging bulb that swung gently without a source of motion. In the corner of the room was a person. Their back was turned to me, shoulders rising and falling in slow, wheezing breaths. And then they turned. It was me, but not quite. Something in the skin was wrong, too smooth, too tight. The eyes were mine, but hollow like glass marbles painted to look real. The thing smiled and put a finger to its lips. Shoo! I woke up screaming. Only when I opened my mouth, I didn't make a sound. Couldn't scream. My mouth was wide open, lungs full of air, heart racing like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. But nothing came out. Not a sound. Not even a breath. Just silence so thick it felt like a pressure system collapsing around me. I clutched my throat, stumbled into the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. And for a moment I wasn't sure it was me. Something about the face looking back was off by a degree so small it shouldn't have registered, and yet it hit me like a punch to the spine. The mouth was mine, but the corners were pulled a little too wide. The eyes too still, the skin too perfect, as if something had been wearing my face for practice and hadn't quite mastered the details. Then I blinked, and the reflection didn't. I backed away so fast I knocked over the trash bin. By the time I dared to look back, the mirror was empty. Not shattered, not dark, just empty. It showed the room behind me, but I wasn't in it. I stood there for what felt like hours, forcing air in and out of my lungs, waiting for my reflection to return. When it finally did, slowly, with the hesitation of something crawling back into its skin, I ran. I didn't take anything with me. Not my phone, not my wallet. I didn't even lock the door. I just ran out into the cold, wet night and kept going until I hit pavement, then kept going even further until I was in town, under the false comfort of gas station lights and the hum of distant trucks. I made it to the diner, the same one where I'd first met the quiet man with the weathered eyes. This time it was nearly empty. The waitress, middle-aged, tired, kind, looked up and said nothing as I walked in, soaked and trembling. She just poured me a cup of coffee and slid it toward me. "You seen the house?" she said, her voice like gravel wrapped in a blanket. I nodded. She didn't ask what happened. Instead, she said, "You hear about the Parker boy?" I shook my head. "3 days ago," she said, staring past me out the rain-smeared window. "Good kid. Bright. Got curious like they all do. Went out there alone. Came back the next morning. Quiet. Smiling. But not right. He just stood in his front yard, humming." She paused, took a sip from her own cup. "His mom went out to get him. Says he looked at her and said, 'It's better on the other side,' then walked back into the trees. Ain't been seen since." I felt my stomach knot. The humming, the smiling, the reflection that wasn't mine. "Some say they don't want to hurt you," she went on. "That whatever lives out there just wants to mirror, reflect something back. But it's not a true reflection. It's a distortion. Like looking into water that doesn't want to show you the truth." I asked her what I could do. How to stop it. She gave me a long, hard look. "You don't. You either leave town or you start forgetting. But either way, you don't go back." I left the diner sometime after midnight. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I checked into the motel by the edge of town. Paid cash. Didn't give a name. That night, the dreams returned, but they were different. I wasn't in the house. I was the house. I could feel things moving inside me. Feel the walls stretching, the windows watching, the doors unlocking on their own. Something walked my hallways, many somethings, and none of them had names. They only had faces. My face. Dozens of them. Standing in rooms that hadn't existed until I imagined them. Singing with mouths that never closed. Humming songs that had no beginning or end. And every one of them looking at me like they were waiting for me to join. I woke with my hand pressed to the mirror above the motel sink. There were words scrawled in the condensation. "Come home. It's been 3 days since then. The town feels different now. Or maybe I do." When people pass me on the street, some flinch. Others glance twice, like they've seen me before but can't remember where. I don't speak unless I have to. Because sometimes, when I open my mouth, I'm not sure whose voice will come out. I haven't gone back to the house. But at night, I still hear the singing. It's closer now. Sometimes I wake up with pine needles on my sheets, or mud on the floor, or my shoes move to face the door. Once I found a photo tucked beneath my pillow. It was of me standing on the Henley's porch. Only, I never took it. And I wasn't alone in the picture. Behind me, in the window barely visible, was another me. Smiling. Watching. Waiting. So if you ever find yourself near Holbrook and someone tells you about the house at the edge of the woods, don't go looking for it. Because once you see it, it sees you. And some reflections don't let go.